What's going down, Savages? Welcome to episode 7 of Le Savage Show. I'm your host, Stéphane Paulin. A couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to be a guest on the Unanimous Decision podcast. Had a great conversation. If you haven't done so, check it out. The episode is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Again, that's the Unanimous Decision podcast. While I was doing the podcast is hosted by Adam Caplan. And I said, listen, I'll do your podcast, and then after that, you can come on my podcast, have, either continue the conversation or just start a brand new conversation. And that's what we did this past Saturday. Adam is a mixed martial artist, former rugby player, football player, a fellow Steelers fan, a great guy. We had a great conversation. I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. So I'm not going to make you wait any longer. I really hope you enjoy episode 7 of Le Savage Show with Adam Caplan. Thanks for accepting to come on the Savage Show, Adam. I appreciate it.
You got it, man. I had such a great time with you on the Unanimous Decision that I absolutely was looking forward to coming on the show with you, man.
It's I had a blast on your show. I always enjoy going on others' podcasts. Just number one, because I get to see how they do it and experience it, not just listening to it. It's completely different. Like, I've listened to your podcast before, but being on it and being part of it's great, man. You do a great job at it. And let's start there. Like, the Unanimous Decision podcast. How did it come to you? Why did you want to get in the podcast business?
Well, first I started off working for Main Event Radio. I was doing a little bit of wrestling and MMA chat with a couple of the guys over there. And then after that, took a long hiatus. And then over the quarantine, there was no better timing. I had been a guest before on my buddy Andy's show. He was formerly Beyond the Fight, and now he's the Drew Experience. And I had such a great time being a guest on a show that it was a shoo-in for me to start it myself. So over the quarantine, took a little bit of time, got a couple of things for equipment. And then after that, just hit the ground running. Fight Island was up and running and was super fresh and exciting. So those were great topics to discuss. And, now really the direction of the show, it was initially combat sports. And then I thought about it. I say, there are so many different avenues that we could all learn about. Let's open it up. So I use it as an opportunity, not only to spread the news far, but also keep it quite close. What I wanted to do is have very close people that I'm friends with on my podcast and be on theirs. Kind of create that cross-pollination, but also use it as an opportunity to have a conversation with people about not just bullshit and about real life topics that we're passionate in and we love.
When I started in podcasts a long time ago, I was inspired by, mostly guys like Joe Rogan. It's pretty much the only podcast back then I would listen to. And I always found it interesting that the concept of just having a real conversation, long form, instead of just, I find people now when they end up having conversations face to face, it's for a very short amount of time. And it's like, you don't really get to experience what it is to sit down and speak for like I try to keep it at an hour for mine, but I'll be honest, if I had a guy like you, like Drew Onyx, the first episode, we went like 3 hours. Like, I knew there was no way I was going to keep this guy in 1 hour, and I didn't want to. I wanted it to be a conversation that, people after 3 hours, they go, oh my God, it felt like I've only been listening for an hour. Like it was interesting the whole time. And I always found that there's no real better way to have a conversation, like a real conversation. And back then I was doing it with a friend of mine. And we were just co-hosting. We were just talking. We had no guests. I had no guests. That's how I did. It was just two guys talking shit about whatever. And then it became something else. And then, especially now during the pandemic, it's like I wanted this thing to become more of what I had in my head, the vision, like more of the conversation, more of be more about the guest and less about just me, and have a real conversation and be able, like you said, like I have a few friends now you and Terry with Hot Sauce Sports. Like, I have a few guys that I know do podcasts, and I always enjoy, boosting their podcast, boosting your podcast, and then we're able to kind of cross pollinate, like you said earlier, between podcasts. So I get to expose who you are and your podcast to my listeners, and you get to do the same thing. And I see such a great opportunity right now with podcasting, because it's the future, I believe, of the either news, media, and whatever entertainment as far as audio for the most part. But when you started the podcast, like, how long did it take you for you to really just do it and say, I want to do a podcast, and then the first episode was out? How long was that process?
Oh, like within 24 hours. As soon as I found out that I had the microphone, as soon as I found out that my brother had bought the microphone years ago and it was still in the Yeti box, I picked it up from my mom's house, and then I basically recorded like the next day.
Wow.
Yeah,
so you were like, boom.
Yeah, I was ready to fucking go, because I already had experience in it before, being guests on shows and being comfortable speaking in radio and whatever the case may be. So to me, it just came natural. I just hit it, looked at I believe it was UFC 250, Felicia Spencer and Amanda Nunes. And I think Cody Garbrandt was the co-main event. And like, there was just so much knowledge there to discuss that, like, I just hit the ground running, no notes, just fucking hit it right off the dome. And that's all she wrote.
It's fun though, having that experience, right? Like, one of the things when I started podcasting that I found to be tricky was if I thought of everything that I wanted to talk about just in my head by myself in the shower, just thinking about it, it was so fluent. My ideas came quick, bing, bang, boom. I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. And then you turn the mic on, and for me, it was completely different, because now I knew that whatever I was going to say, people were going to listen. And the moment that hit me, it took me, that's why I asked the question, because sometimes for me, when I do things like this, it'll be like, okay, I want to do this. But then I over prepare and overthink everything. And it takes me sometimes months before I actually because I want everything to be this and that and this. And I did the same thing with La Savage show. Like, I overthought it so much, and then I wanted it to be this and I wanted it to be that. And I started that way. And now I'm into, episode 6, episode 7. And I'm like, I just want to go back to being just every episode you have a guest on. It doesn't have to be specific to anything. I just want to have cool people I think are interesting to me, that I know I can have a conversation about whatever I want. And if that person happens to have a certain expertise in something, then obviously that's where I'm going to navigate the conversation, because I feel that, it's so fluent. It's so organic for me. There's no other way. I hate having to structure it. Like, I have no preparation. I don't take notes. I knew you were on. I'm like, all right, we're going to talk about podcasting. We're going to talk about fighting. I didn't even know where I was going to start. And just right before, as I was, in just getting ready, I was like, I'll start here. I'll ask him this, and then it'll go. And now we're, already 10, 12 minutes in. And we're having a great conversation, and there's no, direction per se, but it always ends up having, if I pick the right guest, I always end up having great conversations that just navigate themselves away. That's what I love about podcasting. I love to talk. I love to learn new shit, and I like to just have conversations, and that's why I love it. That's why I do it. It's amazing.
Well, it's the best form of conversation also, because there's a pressure to it. You know that everything is being recorded and is going to be judged and looked at after. People will listen to it for 30 seconds. Others will listen to the entire podcast. And the beauty of it is that when you put a pressure on anything, you're going to get two types of performances. You're going to rise or you're going to fold. So what's good about it is that it's not just an intangible conversation that you have with somebody after bumping into them on the street, and then it's like very high bye, everything's good, okay, yeah, you bye, and then like half the time you want to get back to your fucking phone and like just fuck off from life. But these types of conversations, because you're putting them out there in, essentially the universe for people to depict, it's the same thing as fighting. It's the same thing as competition. You have to rise to the occasion. And that's why I like podcasting, because even if I have nothing going on that day, but I dedicate 20 to 2 hours to this game, you end up leaving the microphone feeling like fully energized and full of endorphins, because you just put out quality, you put out content, you put hard work into it. And another thing also is that these are one of those things that people see and they go, oh yeah, like, of course, like another fucking pod. Another fucking there, and whatever the case may be. But the reality is that this takes balls and this takes pressure to be able to go into. So yeah, it's an oversaturated market. But the thing is that anybody who puts themselves on the line to record a podcast and kind of seek that vulnerability, whether you get 10 views or you get 200 in your first start or whatever it is, that feeling that you get when you leave the podcast is exactly what it's all about.
Have you always been one of those types raised to the occasion, or is it something that you had to learn along the way?
I think it's definitely something that I learned to do along the way, but I'm still learning to do that along the way. I think that's a great question. If we're talking competitively or whatever it was, started out playing football, wasn't the greatest football player. And then from there ended up playing rugby for about 10 years. And that's where I definitely could resonate with rising to the occasion and doing such that I was capable of. I mean, when you do football, I was an offensive lineman. It's probably the worst position that you could play in football. And then when I switched to rugby, anything goes, in the sense that offense is defense and defense is offense. There's no switching of positions. So when I had the opportunity to not only play the defensive side of the game, but the offensive and run with the ball, I was like, this is the fucking greatest sport ever. So got involved in that in high school and kind of hit the ground running. I don't want to Uncle Rico it or something from like Napoleon Dynamite, but I've been a captain of a few squads and like won a couple of MVPs, this and that, and was able to play for the province of Quebec with some of my best friends. So that was a great opportunity. And
this is rugby you're talking about, right?
Yeah, this is rugby, exactly. So had some great opportunities there to go out there with the guys and build some memories. And then from there, I had torn my ACL. And that put me out of the game for a little bit. And then I came back to rugby after rehabbing my knee. I came back in like under a year. Wow. And probably like 8 months I came back, which looking back at it, it was probably too early, because I had some severe like flare-ups where I'd have to miss a few weeks and this and that. And then ultimately what happened was I had to get a second ACL surgery. And after that, I was, like, all right, well, fuck that. I'm not going to be playing rugby, and that'll be that. And, that was that. I felt that I had rose to that occasion then in terms of how I am. But then I moved on to the fight game. I mean, I went from there. I was in university. I didn't really like what I was doing. So I said, you know what? I have some money saved up. I'm going to fuck off and I'm going to go to Thailand. And from there, when I went to Thailand, I had trained Muay Thai for 3 months in Chiang Mai at Team Quest Thailand, which is like, realistically, when I look back at it, like I didn't take the rural area Thai gym and like this and that. I took an American-owned gym. I mean, Team Quest is originally from Portland, Oregon, which is the likes of like Dan Henderson and Chael Sonnen, Ed Herman, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going there to like a Muay Thai camp. And, there was a strategy behind it in the sense that I wanted to be out of my comfort zone, but I was at least gonna, try to join a gym that also didn't have Muay Thai, but had a little bit of grappling. So when I got there, basically 3 days after, the greatest story of it all is that there was 2 fighters there. Jeremy Kennedy, who fought in the UFC, has been in PFL, is a current Bellator fighter. He just won like 1 or 2 weeks ago. He was fighting that night on a small show in Chiang Mai with another guy, Mark Abelardo, who fights at a one championship. And like, these dudes are bad dudes. And just basically my 3rd day there, I'm going to pro MMA fights in these small, like shitty Thai bar area surrounded by Thai bars, and they have no idea what's about to happen, and neither do we. And basically my introduction was getting to hang out with the pro team and really get what it's like to be part of that culture. And from there, man, I mean, you know, you're somebody who is trained in mixed martial arts and in boxing, and you know, you could attest to this, is that in the fight game, it's very hard to ever feel completely satisfied and feel like you're going to rise to the occasion in everything that you do, because you're constantly fighting this other half of you that deals with a severe amount of pressure and maybe insecurity. So as much as you're trying to rise yourself to the occasion, you're kind of getting weighed down. Whereas in other sports, team sports like rugby, you got 14 other guys that you can rely on. So to answer your question, I mean, in the fight game, I think that if I've ever felt that I rose to the occasion, it's very short term, because then very shortly after you get humbled by something else.
The weight of the pressure and so many things when you're in the fight game. I remember it was like every single training, it was, I put that pressure. Every single training had to be at a certain standard. And if it wasn't at that standard, I wasn't happy. And it was hard because you constantly putting that pressure. Like you said, it weighs you down, right? You're trying to rise all the way to this glorious thing of fighting another human being at one point. Because let's face it, like you could do MMA to do MMA just to get in shape, but like guys like us that do it with aspiration of actually fighting. You spoke about the pressure. I remember for me, it was the biggest battle for me was the fears. I would put these fears in my head, the fear of getting hurt, the fear of and then after a while, that fear of getting hurt became fear of long-term repercussions, such as head damage and head trauma and joints not working properly, not being able to remember my kids' names when I'm fucking 55 years old, or remember where I'm at, or not being able to wipe my ass properly when I'm, you know, a bit older because I hurt so much, you know. And the more experience I gained, the more these fears became bigger in my head. Like the better I became, the more aware for some reason I became of the consequences of fighting, because the more you invest time in fighting, like, you know, the more time you spend in the gym, yeah, you're going to get better, but you're also going to have more of the days where you go in thinking you're the shit, sparring, you're like, I feel good. Then you get pummeled for 5 rounds and you're like, what the fuck just happened? And then you go home and you're like, I done. I quit. What the fuck? Like, I thought I was this. I just got in. Dude, these up and downs, like that thing. And every time you have those days where you're getting pummeled and and then it creeps in, you're like, fuck, that wasn't good. Then the next time there's a little bit more fear there because it's in the back of your mind. It's in the back of your mind that these guys are hungry and that you think you're that shit. But last week you fucking sparred with this dude and he ransacked you and you're like, man, now it's in your head. Being able to overcome those things in your head that tell you, like, that guy, like, remember last time he fucking, you know, he raped you on the ground, you know, and you're like, damn, that is the reason why I push myself so hard, because that part of your mind that you need to harden to be able to overcome those small fears. Those are the fucking hardest ones, because they're the hardest one to admit. People don't want to admit as a man. There's this, I don't want to call it macho energy, but let's call it that it's always like, are you all right? No, I'm good. But inside, sometimes you're not good. You know, you might have hurt yourself, but you don't want to, you know, you're in the fight business. You can't show blood, you know, because it's like sharks. They smell blood. And a lot of these guys, they're like, that guy, he's hurt, I'm going to attack. And that's the mentality you must have. But the more you kind of invest yourself into it, it's like more of the awareness. And when I became too aware is when I realized that if I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to have to find a way to get better at overcoming this kind of awareness of what is possible on the negative side of the fight game?
Well, fuck. I mean, that's the most complex part about it, because the fight game is full of liars. That's what it comes down to. Everyone's lying to themselves and they're lying to each other about who's the baddest man and who's the most trained and who's the least scared and who's the most mentally tough. So realistically, though, the only person that you can never lie to is yourself. Because you get found out very, very quickly. You can't rationalize. You have to be brutally honest, and you have to almost be overly critical and over obsessed with not getting too lost in the sauce with your own abilities. Because the worst part about it is that if you make a mistake for yourself and you're able to make a self-discovery of that mistake, the burn doesn't hurt as much as when somebody fucking shows you what your weaknesses are and what you're incapable of. If you want to challenge your own capabilities, that's cool. And if you fail, it's a little bit different than when you have somebody throw the F right in your face. So
well, the consequences in the fight game are way, way worse than, let's say, I'm going to commit to running 10K. And then 6Ks in, I can't even move my head anymore, but I'm on myself. Okay, I tried my best. But you show up in the gym for sparring telling all these people are trying to portray that you're this shit, and then people punch you in the face. Then the consequences are way worse than they were before for anything else, right? So when you that's an added pressure, like we were talking about earlier, right? Because then you're exposed, because there's always someone else in the gym, and at least there's the other guy punching you in the face going, fuck, this is easy. And you're like, man, this is not easy.
Well, the funny thing is that the fight gym is one of the few places where you'll see athletes that don't actually blatantly out loud compliment their own skill set. You'll see it in soccer teams. You'll see it in basketball teams. You'll see it in hockey teams. These guys are blowing each other up. But when it comes into a boxing gym or an MMA gym, guys are almost trying to downgrade themselves out loud when others are complimenting them just to remain, quote unquote, humble. I think another part of that is too, though, is the fight game is one of those games where the yes man doesn't really belong or exist. And I think that's why that mentality is found in most of those combat sports gyms, because the yes man mentality is something that most fighters must be resistant to, just based on professional history of guys getting fucked by promoters and other coaches and agreeing to things that they shouldn't have. And even in the amateur game, I mean, look, mishaps happen. In Thailand, for example, they might tell you right away, hey, we think you should fight. We think you should fight, when sometimes those people have no business fighting. And there are people who have been inside of amateur Quebec boxing matches that weren't necessarily so lucky in the matchmaking and, did get set up in a scenario, or perhaps a guy went to bronze gloves and he had 0 fights and the guy had the maximum of 5 fights. And you get fucked up by a guy who's 5-0 and you're 0-0, So the yes man doesn't really belong there, because, the loss is always going to be a lot worse when it doesn't come down to how many balls went into your net or went into your basket or went over the net and went out of bounds. When we're talking about wins and losses that are defined by punches and kicks necessarily being thrown, the amount of pressure and the stain that gets left on it is, it's not like anything else, man. So that's why that whole stay humble mentality is something that you'll see that you don't really see a lot in everyday life.
The concept of the yes man is like a cancer to a fighter, right? It's a cancer to being told that, dude, you got this. You're the best here. No one can hold. I don't understand. There's no way to get any better that way, because after a while, imagine being told all the time you're the best. No one can hold a candle to you. No one can touch you. You're destroying everybody in the gym. Then all this time, there's a guy, somewhere else training harder. His mind is stronger. The fight business, if you're a fighter, there's so many different aspects, right? There's the mental, the physical, there's so many things you got to be able to balance all in the air, all while being locked up in a cage in your underwear, just super exposed because you got people watching. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was fighting, I would try to invite as many people as I could, you know? So then you got all your friends, your family, your moms in the stands, and you're like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, I'm about to go up here in my underwear with these gloves on and just try to beat up someone else and not get embarrassed. Because at the end of the day, when you're starting off, you're like, man, I don't want to be embarrassed. I have all my friends, all my family here. I remember the loss when I would lose. Oh man, the sting of just like what went wrong, like what the fuck. And for me, it was always a mental aspect. It was never the physical aspect. It was always, I would break down mentally before the fight. I would psych myself out so much that it's something that I had to learn. Like we spoke on your podcast, you know, the mental fortitude aspect. When I was early in the fight game, it wasn't there for me, and it was the main factor in why I'm not a fighter, you know, anymore. It's like you need to be so sharp, so strong to be able to, like I said, to overcome those things that I mentioned earlier. It takes a toll, not just physically on these types of athletes, but mentally, it takes a toll. And a lot of guys aren't willing to talk about that aspect a lot, because like, you know me, like you and I know this, like when you're in the fight business, like you need to be invested 100%. Yeah. If you're not invested in this and making this the only thing in your life, then it's hard to succeed. It's really hard to succeed. You can't be part-time fighter. You can't, if you want to make money out of it. It's not a thing. Right. And I think that's why a lot of people get lost in it. I think a lot of people realize that, and they're not willing to make that sacrifice.
Absolutely not. I mean, the daily sacrifice that it takes from the average person, you know, getting in the way of their jobs and their student life, perhaps, or whatever it is. There's a reason why there's a small percentage of guys out of most gyms that are MMA fighters, you know, or professional rather. You know, most of the gyms out there don't really, maybe at most have amateur fighters. There's only a couple of pro gyms really in Montreal, we could say. Maybe a little bit more on the boxing side, but you know, look, you said it perfectly on the last time I had you on the unanimous decision. And what it came down to is that the majority of people instinctually think that they could get into the fight game because deep down, we all think if the shit hit the fan, we'd be able to fight our way out of a scenario. That's just how we are, as you know, as if you strip us all the way down to barbaric times, that's what it comes down to. So in today's day, when they see the fight game, everyone feels that they could do it. And they just think of the end result, like you spoke about, getting the hand raised, having the Rocky moment, being covered in blood and knocking him out in the 12th round and you know, getting wasted at the club after and doing your thing, you know, like 1 second you're a Muhammad Ali and then you're like Floyd Mayweather in the club and then you're dancing like McGregor. It's like a whole show. But it's an everyday fucking thing. It's the running, it's the dieting, it's, you know, waking up to do your running and your sit up and your neck exercises. And then you got to shadow box and then you got to do it all over again. Like I said on the last show, Carl Froch said it best. Not only did I have to be a pro boxer, I had to be a pro fucking cross trainer, swimmer, runner, cyclist, etc. There are so many opportunities in this game that for you to get better at, but with more possibilities becomes more where the average person just isn't willing to do all of those things. And, you know,
they start cutting corners. They start like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take, I don't want to run. I'm not going to do the cardio, but I'll do the sparring though. Can we do sparring every day? You ever see these guys, right? Like, let's just train. Like, but yeah, we got to do cardio.
100%. I mean, there's every corner being cut in the game every single day. There's, you know, but what it comes down to is that if you really want it, then you'll be able to go through it. I just think that the fight game is one of the most trickiest ones to get into because there's no there are teammates, but at the end of the day, when you're sparring against that guy, you want to have the better round. So it's a very independent thinker sport. You know, you can't be codependent on people. And I think that the more that you're codependent on people and you're not, you know, co-signing yourself 1,000%, the more room there is for error. And I think that that's the most frustrating thing about the boxing game is that, that's why I love it to an extent. Like, even on my worst weeks, I feel that it's exposing me perhaps for who I am in the moment. And I know that when I'm in the ring and I'm hitting the pads and the timing's good and the breath is nice and low and it's not too heavy and the feet are firing, that I'm probably doing everything right off the clock. So, and then when you don't see that moment slide, then, the self-reflection window, if you're completely in tune with your honesty and mistakes, is so fucking small that you obviously know the answer. But most of these people are upset in the moment, and then they get back to their car and they call their girlfriend and they forget all about the session, and they don't really strive for that greatness. And that's why I have so much respect for the amateur and pros that you see in there every day working hard and whatever the case may be, because these are the guys that have some type of discipline. And I think that, that's what it's all about.
You also have to take in consideration when you're an MMA fighter, a boxer, anybody in the fight business, that you have to, having a good coach is a huge part of your success. Like you mentioned earlier, that codependence, like a good coach is going to become that person that you can depend on every single time you walk into that gym. Like you it's automatic that you believe that person has your best interests at hand. Like he wants what's best for you and all of his fighters or all of the guys and girls that he trains. So, and they can depend on him. And most good coach, they're ready, willing to do anything possible. Like, I know I've coached my son's baseball team for 4 years now. And if a kid comes, nothing makes me happier than when a kid comes to practice just ready to get better and learn, because that's the kid that's going to listen, be coachable. Like being coachable is a thing that I had to learn. I was shitty at it because I thought when I was younger that I was the shit, like everybody, like a lot of us. And being coachable is something that I had to become better at. And I myself being a coach and having coached young kids, being coachable is the biggest aspect that's missing in a lot of these athletes. If you're not coachable, if you think you're the best every time you come to practice and that practice isn't for you and you don't show up to practice, I can't fuck with you. I can't fuck with you because to me, you're not interested in just being better and improving every day. Like, I don't know what you want to call it as a motto or a mindset. Like my mindset every single day when I wake up is that today I need to be better at something. Either it's if I work on my patience, either I work, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be something better in the gym. Like, oh, I need a better running time. It doesn't have to be something like that. Every day I aim to improve myself, even by one small, minuscule percentage. And if you're an athlete, being coachable is an extremely important thing to be and have, because if you're not coachable and you don't listen, it's like, imagine a coach taking its time and his experience to tell you what you're doing wrong and then taking time to correct you slowly and bringing you along to getting rid of those mistakes. Like it happens a lot in combat sports. Bad coaching leads to bad, technique. Then you show up somewhere else and the coach is like, I have to strip you all down. You've heard that before. We've all been there. Like, if you want to be better, you need to strip you down back to basic and relearn everything because your technique is shit. If you're not coachable, forget it. You're never going to get better. You're never going to get better. So one thing that for me as a coach, man, when a kid comes and he's coachable and he's ready to learn, man, I don't care what his skill level is. I don't care. You're going to get opportunities that the kid that has more talent than you and doesn't show up to practice, that for me ain't a team player, especially if I'm coaching a team sport. Team is first. But if I'm coaching an individual, it's the same story. If you don't come ready to be better and give it everything you got, I can't fuck with you. Because to me, today you might give me 75%, tomorrow you might give me 98%. then in 3 days, you might come in and give me 30%. Now I'm just wasting my fucking time. And that's why having great coaches, especially in combat sports, is a huge, it's a huge benefit. But I think it's it's either the luck or the draw or whatever, but you have to do your research if you want to get in the fight business. Obviously, you know, you're always going to gravitate to the most popular gym. Like if you're going to come to Montreal, there's a few gyms you can name, you know, and it's just like, but sometimes it's not necessarily the big name. You have to have that relationship with these guys, this group of coaches or one coach, where if it clicks and you become coachable, then sky's the limit. And there, that connection, having the importance of having a great coach and having that connection with not just one athlete, but many athletes, it's something that is rare. And that's why I think there might be a couple handfuls of really, really, really good MMA coach that we can probably name right now. There's a few, but you understand what I mean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most people fall in love with the allure of a coach's status, when realistically what it comes down to is the personal connection and relationship. You know, they don't have to be the most popular trainer in the gym. They don't have to be the trainer on Instagram with the most followers. So I think ultimately that's a great thing that you brought up, because most people do gravitate towards the big name gyms because they want to, you know, be able to puff out their chest and kind of wear that crest on their sleeve as well, which is understandable. There is a marketing example of it, but you know, the ones who are really training out of those gyms do understand that there is a separation, you know, between the professionals and the amateurs and the students in those parties. You know, it's not as inclusive as most people would think. So, you know, yeah, absolutely. And then being coachable, well, you know, if you're not coachable, I mean, you're wasting your fucking time. You're wasting everybody's time, because the ones that are not coachable and are not an undeniable talent, they will never get by because they're not overly spectacular. The ones that are uncoachable, that are overly spectacular and are constantly shocking the world, that's a different story. But if we're talking about somebody who's, you know, a little bit better than somebody else just based of not giving a fuck, but isn't coachable, it really doesn't have a place. And the thing is that fighting is already hard enough. And when you're dealing with personalities as well, it could get even harder. It could get more challenging and get more annoying. That's why a lot of the times you're seeing now, camps are getting smaller. They're getting more personalized. Guys want to have more control on who they actually have around them and not just use the sparring partners of the facility, creating more of a boxing approach to it, you know, making it more scientific in the sense of handpicking bodies, handpicking the facility that they want to work out of, and just having everything the fighter's way. And I appreciate that. The problem is that when the amateurs and the students start thinking that they're a fucking pro and they can start calling the shots with who they want to spar with at your local gym where you pay a membership to, you got to pay your dues like everybody else. You got to get in line with the guy you see drilling and hitting the mitts with the coach, and the coach using him as an example as a sparring partner. You got to go with that motherfucker just like everybody else. It is what it is. And, you know, that's just that's just the whole game, man. It's coming down to leaving your ego at the door. You got to have a very good long-term memory, but have a very good short-term memory, and in a good and a bad way. You got to forget some things right away, and you got to hold on to things for dear life afterwards in terms of techniques and memories in the training room to translate to combat competition. So
teaching an athlete, I do the same thing with my kids when I coach baseball. Like I tell them, especially in baseball, you need to have a short-term memory, and it needs to be sharp and it needs to be on point. Because if you make a mistake on the field, you got to get over that mistake. You can't think about it, because the more you think about it, the more the chances are, the higher the chance you're going to commit that same mistake again. In baseball, you make a mistake, you miss a ball. Look, your team still needs you. You still need to get an out to get out of the inning. Like you can't just sit there and feel, you know, self-pity on yourself and all that shit. Same thing in combat sports. Like you have one bad round of sparring. Well, you got 4 more today. So guess what? You got to have to blink and be able to forget about that round, and then figure out how not to repeat that same mistake. Like being able to having that humbleness, or I don't know how you'd call it, but being able to sit back and go, okay, that was shitty. And I need to get better at these things right away. Like, or I need to correct them. I know how, I've been shown how. That short-term memory is so important, so important. But again, like you said, there's so many different small aspects in the fight business you have to remember as well, right? And it has to become second nature too. That's why they repeat everything in the gym. A boxer, it has to be muscle memory. It has to be all that thing. If you guy throws a 1-2, you have to be able to counter. You exactly know what you need to counter. You don't have to think about it. Like the more you think about it, the more you're going to get countered and punched in the face. And it's a dirty, dirty business. It's hard. It's a hard business. It's a hard thing to be in. And I'm always interested in people. Sorry. I'm always interested in people that choose to you have my immediate respect just for trying to become a fighter, because I tried to be a professional fighter and I did not accomplish that goal yet. But I understand how hard it is to do things like be a fighter. So the moment someone tells me I'm training, dude, you have my respect. You have my respect because it's so hard. And that's why talking to guys like you that choose to put two feet in this and go forward and trying to become a fighter or doing anything in the fight business, boxer, MMA, Muay Thai, whatever it is. It's intriguing to find out personalities, to try to see what kind of personalities trait that someone has in order to not only succeed, but just try, because it's fucking hard. It is hard.
It is fucking hard. I mean, for me, at first it was something, maybe the journey was to become a fighter and whatever the case may be. And then what it came down to is that when I spent time around professional fighters and, high level guys, I definitely saw the gap between the two. And I just, I felt like most people, how it's disrespectful. It's disrespectful to go and call yourself a fighter when these guys are sweating it every day.
Yeah.
Every day and night. I think that there is a difference between somebody who competes and somebody who's a professional fighter. Both guys deserve respect. I'm not taking away from it, but I think that in most cases, fighting's the easy part. It's kind of the easy part. It's the one time where you can finally let go and no fucks given, because it's almost like the only live or die moment you really have throughout the entire training of martial arts. You don't die if you skip your run. You don't die if you lose in sparring, but if you get knocked the fuck out in a fight, it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
So fighting in most ways is the easy part. It's everything else that's hard, and the discipline in your diet and in your training and the sacrifices that you make on your mind and your body. So, yeah, of course. I mean, that's why I never really like to label myself as a fighter or an amateur boxer or this or that. It's like, I'm somebody that could, fuck somebody up more than the average person, but I'm not really ready to put a label on anything. And that's the beauty of it for me, is that there's no reason to, call yourself one thing and, not really maybe necessarily abide by the complete and utter job title. And that's also me being hard on myself, but that's just the honesty behind it.
No, I feel the same way. Like, I never speak. I never call. It's hard to. I might do it, and call myself a fighter, but it sounds weird. Like I always have like this imposter syndrome. Sometimes they call it like I never did any pro fights and only competed in amateur. Like I still did something that most would never do, and that I'm extremely proud of that accomplishment. I'm proud of the accomplishment that I've accomplished in the mixed martial arts, and then I transitioned that into a professional wrestling career. Same thing. As a pro wrestler, I call myself a pro wrestler because that's what I am now. It's been part of my life for the last 4 years. I've developed this persona. I'm a pro wrestler. That's what I am, and I've performed. But sometimes it's like, it sounds weird. Like when I say it, like, oh, I'm a pro wrestler. Oh, like, cause then someone that doesn't necessarily know what it is will automatically assume that I'm on TV, because a lot of the people, they're not aware of the independent scene if you're not a hardcore wrestling fan, right? So then they go, oh, are you on TV? And then you have to go into explaining, and then sometimes like it takes the sting out of it for some people, because for the non-fan, they just see it as like, well, you're not really a professional wrestler if I'm not seeing you on TV. And it's kind of like, what? Like, you don't, it's weird because I've always done things now from being, aspiring to become a professional fighter and not being able to achieve that, and then transitioning into becoming a pro wrestler. And then the moment you become a pro wrestler, then you gotta, what's the goal? Like, what do you want to be? Like, you just want to be an independent wrestler and just wrestle once a month in your local town or in your surrounding? Because that's fine. A lot of guys do that because they love pro wrestling and they love performing. And then there's the guys that aspire, that want to be on WWE TV, and then you have the guys that want to go to Japan, and then you got all sorts of people in the pro wrestling business, and they want to go in different, venues and different places. But at the end of the day, you got to put in the time when you're a pro wrestler. Like, it's like, there's a grind that's like no other. I don't care. I know it's hard to be a fighter, but if you want to be good at pro wrestling, dude, you got, especially in the independent scene, you got to do it every weekend. Do it every as many times as possible, so that you could become better at not only the technical part of wrestling, but at the, how to deal with the crowds, if you're a face, how to get the cheers, if you're a heel, how to get the boos, like all those things, plus the skills inside the ring, plus your act, like there's so many different aspects, plus you're putting your body through these, sometimes this crazy shit, and you take all these bumps and all these things. At the end of the day, I always look back on the things that I accomplished, and I go, man, like, did I ever fucking choose some of the most crazy shit to do? But I then realized, I'm like, well, that's who I am. That's my personality. That's who I've been my whole life. And I've been trying to express that from a young age. I've been trying to express myself differently than anybody else, either by the music I listen to, by the clothes I wear, by the, the things I love. And it just kind of like just became reality later in life, and I look back and I'm like, man, it's quite the path that I've chosen in life, but the lessons that I've learned, like, I'm so like grateful for all those lessons, all that like, to the point that I'm 40 now, and I like, no ifs, ands, and buts. Like, I have never been, stronger mentally, physically, and ready for anything, right? Like you said earlier, like, you want to believe that if shit hit the fan and I had to fucking, take care of my family, that I'd be able to do that. And I think for a man, or I don't know if it's just a family man, but I think for me, it's important. It's important that if shit hit the fan, that I could take care of my fucking family, you know what I mean? And that I could hold, like, I'd be able to be confident enough to hold my own. Like, I think it's important. I think it's not everybody that thinks like that, obviously, but maybe when you've been in the combat business like us, or like you've been in a ring and competed or done whatever, you kind of see that like survival of the fittest mentality, and that you have to be willing to push yourself physically, mentally, every fucking day, and to just, again, back to what I said earlier, just so I could be better than the person I was yesterday. I think it's so important. The growth aspect of life, you have to find things that'll make you grow in life, not, and that's what the things you choose are extremely important when it comes to that growth anyway.
With the growth comes pressure. That's what you need. It's all about pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure makes diamonds. If you're, I always wondered, like, fuck, if I didn't choose rugby, or I didn't choose maybe boxing or whatever it is, like, what sport could I choose that, like, I could fucking just right away knock right out of the park? You know what I mean? It's like, you always choose all of these challenging things, and they're contact sports, and they take a toll on your body. And, they're the type of sports that it doesn't matter the accomplishment. It's never ever big enough because it's not mainstream in a sense as well. Rugby in Quebec and boxing around most communities, especially suburbs and stuff, is not quite popular. So it's always one of those things that are overlooked, and something that is already such a fragile sport to be in, and then when you're in a community that kind of overlooks the game, it's a difficult thing. So it's just fucking crazy, man. I mean, one day you're on top, one day you're on the bottom in the fight game. And, I just think that what it comes down to for most people is consistency. You got to remain consistent. I just don't stress it enough that for every day you miss, you set yourself back 3 days. And for every day that you're actually there, you're going to see the benefits at the start of every week. On the hardest Fridays come the best Mondays. That's usually the way I like to look at it. You know what I mean? And I think that most of the people that get through that grind and that routine, that's where they kind of are able to get through it. And, that imposter syndrome is the most complicated part about it. Because again, like I said, we're constantly lying to ourselves, but we're constantly trying to be honest with ourselves at the same time. So you develop that imposter syndrome. And that's really, I think something that most people have a very hard time acknowledging and getting off of their chest is am I being completely true to who I am? And am I struggling with that imposter syndrome? And I think that in the fight game, it's a very prevalent thing. Plain and simple.
I think that the part that I struggle with a lot in life, as far as the road that I've chosen to beat from, like the path that I've chosen to be on for my life, all this thing is that sometimes I don't know if it's like that for you, but for me, there's certain things that that others would see as accomplishments that I don't see as accomplishments for myself.
Facts. Agreed.
Or either that, or that the accomplishments that the accomplishments that I do see aren't as big as the outside people see it. For example, if my wife looks at one of my accomplishments, from her perspective, it's a huge accomplishment. But from my perspective, and this is like this for most of my accomplishments in life, it was okay. Like I go back to when I ran that marathon on 30 days notice, For me, I did it. And it had been done before. I had one example of, and I'm sure it's been done many times, but I had one example that I was able to find of this guy that did this, zero basically running experience, 30 days, run a marathon. And because someone else did it, I knew that it was capable. That's why in my head, I'm like, if that guy can do it, I could definitely do it. But even that accomplishment, like for most people, and I've got messages, like it blows my mind, because that's the imposter syndrome for me. It's that those accomplishments in my eyes are like, they're okay. So I don't deserve any praise, anybody, but then I get a message from someone saying, listen, I've been following you. And then you go, Jesus, from someone else's perspective. And because we live in the social media world where, like, if you want to create content, if you're in the content creating business, which that's what I am now. I'm a content, like I'm not even going to use it, but I create content, podcast, social media. Like, it has to be part of it. It's part of of creating that content. So sometimes when you see your accomplishments, I look at them and I go, well, yeah, it was okay. But to someone else, it's something they can't even think of accomplishing. Or if they do think of accomplishing it, it's so much bigger than how you see it. And I think that's something that you need to keep in perspective. Especially when you're an athlete, and that you're also creating content at the same time, because we live in a social media age where everybody's creating content. And if you want to be relevant in any business, you have to be part of the social media and you have to create content. And you have to have that kind of like narcissistic qualities a little bit to want to have that attention on you, because that's, you know, if you like, for me, if I want to make this podcast thing one day something that I can make money out of, then I need to treat it as such from the beginning, and then promote it, and then want to put myself out there. Putting yourself out there is so hard to do for so many people, that I do it. I try to do it on a weekly basis with a guest, someone that I'm trying to have a conversation with. So I do my best to, you know, to make those part of my accomplishments, you know?
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, like you said, you know, Instagram and social media and all of those things is just a highlight reel, and everyone feels like they deserve to have their own highlight reel, as they should. And your highlight reel could consist of different things. It could be photography, it could be videography, it could be podcasting, whatever the case may be. We all have different avenues to showcase that highlight reel. So, you know, that really is what it is. You know, some folks put more effort into what they're cooking this evening to post on Instagram, and that's a big deal to them. And then others think it's just, you know, a little snide joke on Twitter, and other people like to sit on a podcast and yap for like 2-3 hours at a time. You know, so everybody has their own avenue for that highlight reel. And, you know, whether or not, you know, this might be pressure, you know, it's also pressure for the girl who's trying to impress her friends by posting a picture on Instagram, or, you know, some guy who just started his football career and wants to build his first huddle page to send off to schools. You know, everybody feels that they deserve their own highlight reel. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
I see it in athletes because, especially in baseball, because, you know, my son plays baseball, and I follow a lot on the Instagram pages, a lot of these young athletes, 11, 12 years old, that are being recruited by already college. Like these guys are good ball players at 11, 12, 13. They have an Instagram page, and they're constantly posting their shit on their page. Like their every workout, every pitching session, every batting practice, everything, every video, everything, because they understand at that age that this is the future. It's already here. But for kids that are like my son, that's 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, you're trying to be an athlete. You're trying to be in a sport, like you really committed. Like I see these young baseball players that are committed, not only because, you know, their parents want them to be professional, but because they're fucking talented. There's something about a baseball player. You got the type that is willing to grind it out to get better at something. And then you've seen him, probably seen it on the football field, on the rugby field. Then you have the kid that's just a natural. It's when you see that kid that's just a natural, you're like, dude, he doesn't even have to try. The way he throws, his mechanics are on par. He goes to bat. He knows how to swing a bat. He makes contact every time. His hand-eye coordination is out of this world. Like, oh my God. To be able to find that and then be able to cultivate it into to not just like, because the work ethic is what's important with these athletes, because the one that are really good for, like are naturals, if they're not surrounded by the right coach, by the right people, they're gonna be surrounded by those yes people. And then after a while, they're gonna be like, well, I don't have to work at this. And then the guy that's not as talented and the non-natural guy, but that's in the gym every single day working hard, one day you pass that guy, and then when that athlete sees this other guy that passed him, now he's better simply because he worked harder. His ego is so fragile because he never worked at that ego ever one day. He didn't have to work at that ego thing because he was always the best athlete. He was always the best ball player, and he didn't even have to try. So he didn't sharpen that fucking mind. This kid that's been working hard because he's not as athletic as the other kid. He's not as fast. He's not as strong, but I'm going to work. Once that kid passes that other kid, and then that kid will never catch him up. It's game over. Because he's so mentally fragile that when he sees someone else simply on his work ethic pass him by, if this kid doesn't have that mental toughness of going, now I have to outwork this guy, a lot of the times these kids drop off, and you're like, wow, like how did this kid not become a ball player? I don't get it. And it's probably has a huge factor. And I see it constantly at a young age. And then, like I said, let's go back to social media. You got these kids and these dads that they want to make sure, like, if I know my kid is talented at something, I will do my everything to put him out there, because I think that if someone sees him and goes, yo, who's this kid? Let's start following this kid. I'm not doing it for my, like, look at how I quote. I'm doing it because if I see something in my son, I'm going to want to expose that to as many people in the business, whatever it is, baseball, football, whatever it is. And it's like, as a father, I can only be there to support you and try to help you be better. That's my only goal as a parent. If you want to, not my only goal, but it's one of the very thing I take extreme pride in, is that if my kids want to get better at something, I'm going to be behind them, trying everything to, if I don't know, we'll hire someone. I'll get you in contact with someone. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, I guess, at the end of the day.
That's the beauty of social media, is that, you could obviously portray these highlight reels to, get eyes on your son in terms of the baseball, NCAA, whatever the case may be. And it's almost, because the avenue is so easy to actually access, you'd almost be doing you and your son a disservice by not doing that. You know what I mean? In terms of not putting those things out there to get that potential, especially in Quebec. They do take their baseball quite seriously. And I think that baseball, kind of like hockey, is one of the more honest systems in the way of being able to work up the ranks and become professional in that sport. I feel like there are a lot more politics and ins and outs and variables in a sport like football. Boxing is another one. Rugby in Canada is certainly another one. Basketball, I think it's also more clear cut, like a hockey and a baseball. So, it's one of those sports that are looked at as a very clean sport. And, it's very easy to depict the skill sets between players in baseball, because a lot of the times people think that baseball players are the least athletic players of all athletes. And that's not necessarily the case. Because an athlete is an athlete.
Baseball is, sometimes you get lost in the fact that you could become a professional baseball player by only being good at hitting the ball. You don't have to be good at any other aspect of baseball. If you're a monster at hitting the ball, guess what? You can be good at this. Same thing goes defensively. Defensively is a bit harder, but if you're a pitcher, right, and you could throw 60 at a young age, and all of a sudden you got movement on your ball, and people start noticing you, then man, you keep working at it, keep working at it. It's having the support system to be able to push these young athletes to want to just stay inside and be better every time. When they start noticing that when they put in the work, they get better, and they start wanting to do it on their own. I'm starting to see that in my son now, and it's the most beautiful thing in the world. Well, I don't have to push him, prod, and fucking get up. It's like, hey, I have this thing. I want to get better. Let's go for a run. Okay, let's go for a run. Let's do it. Now it's, pride, it brings me joy to my heart when I see that.
Beautiful thing.
So what's next with the podcast business? Let's get back to the podcast and end it here. What's next for the Unanimous Decision? Where you see this podcast, moving forward?
So where I see the podcast going is branching out into different avenues, focusing still on combat sports and the personalities that come with it, whether it's the podcast community or professional fighters. Another avenue would be, getting into basketball and getting into, just maybe general psychology of life, like just all around topics, not being able to just stick into one box or one genre. I just think that life's too short to be able to focus necessarily on one thing, because then that limits to the different amounts of people that I could speak with. So that's why I would rather broaden the horizon, but always keep it on the same theme that, have to do with perseverance and performance and such like that, because I think that ultimately that's what we're all looking for as humans, is to perform well and to be able to persevere. Should it be tough or should it be easy? So that is definitely the thing that I'm the most interested in terms of keeping up with the podcast. because I'm honest, I haven't been as consistent as I would have liked to be. And I kind of attribute that to being a slowdown in the combat sports game, and sports in general kind of being over, except for football. But football for me is one of the few sports that I use as an escape. It's not something that I necessarily want to report on. And, it's the one sport where I'm really passionate about a team, so I could be a real fan in and really care. For basketball, I like players. I don't really like teams. I have a soft spot for the Raptors, but football is the only sport where I could really back somebody for what they are. It doesn't matter who's in the fucking jersey, I'm rocking with the team.
Yeah.
So that's why I keep football as my guilty pleasure, I guess you could say, or whatever it is. But the direction of the podcast is, more or less work with more guests, less about it being myself and my own voice, but hearing the voices of others and, just try tribulations of other people such as yourself and anybody else who's going to come along the journey. I think that podcasting is the perfect way to have people kind of tune out from the universe and be able to just separate themselves from who they are and retain some knowledge in something that doesn't have to do with their job title, doesn't have to do with their family life or their work life, has to do with something that makes them feel happy and whole, that doesn't earn them an income. You know what I mean? Like I'm listening to Combat Sports Podcast, and it's not helping my business. It's not helping my family, but it's helping my personal interests. So it keeps me happy. And that to me is why I do it. I really feel that for every person that listens to it, whether I always say 5 minutes or 5 hours, I just think the fact that somebody took the time to see, you know what, that guy put his ass on the line for 30 minutes. I want to hear what that motherfucker had to say. Just that is the direction where I see the unanimous decision. Just creating constant content for people that when they are having an off day, they want to tune in.
It's hard to be consistent. It's something I struggle with too. You put out expectation for your show or for the podcast, and I do it in advance. I put out these expectations and what people can expect from the podcast. And then after that, that's a pressure that you have to deliver week after week after week. Like I said, I went back to being this style of interview. Like I don't like using interview. I just want to have conversation. And I've produced episodes in the past where it was just myself, a lot of the episodes, because I couldn't get a hold of a guest or this or that, and I just wanted to create content. It's a lot harder. It's good that you're adapting though. Like I love seeing that. You had you have to be willing to adapt with things like this. Sometimes I feel like people, they have an idea in their head and they're very like steadfast. Like that's the idea of in my head, and I have to make that happen. And then if they're not willing to be a bit malleable at it, when there's a bump in the road, let's say I'm a guy, I'm a person, podcast that just guest. That's the idea of my guest. It's me and a guest. It's me and a guest. It's me and a guest. And then one day I'm ready to record a podcast for the next week, and then my guest drops out, and then I'm stuck, can't get a guest. And what am I going to do if you're not willing to adapt and be ready for something else, something different? Then you kind of like stop yourself sometimes, and it gets frustrating. So I like that, you're moving along and you're doing, it's the same way for me. It's the same way. It's like, I just want to be as consistent as possible. But hey, if there's a week that I'm too fucking busy and I don't have time to book anything, because at the end of the day, like you said, I'm making money out of this right now. It's a passion of mine that I hopefully one day I'll be able to create enough content where am able to get sponsors and make some money out of it. But again, like I can't keep putting that pressure on myself that if 1 week I don't release anything, then guess what? Just tell your listeners, release something on social media and tell them like there's going to be new episodes next week. And be able to, like you said, like either be interview style or just to talk about sports or the fighting business. And it's I just enjoy other people when they we're doing similar interests in mine and seeing them grow within the same business. So I'm happy for you, man. I'm happy for the Unanimous Decision podcast. It's good for you. Good.
I appreciate that. I mean, look, what it comes down to is that I didn't want to feel like I was closed in a box. So what I did is I just kind of broke all the walls down and said, hey, you know what? I'll take on any topic I want, because if I was passionate about the fight game, then to that extent, then, you know, I would have something to talk about every day, whether I felt it was big news or it wasn't. But genuinely, I'm the type of person that if it doesn't excite me, I won't necessarily want to talk about it. So why not gravitate to that excitement? Because if I'm benefiting off of the topic and people are choosing to listen to me, then they're going to benefit off it as well, because they want to hear anything that I have to say. So, you know, it's all about being malleable. And I just asked myself one simple question: what would get me to do this more often? And I said, well, I would talk about more things. Okay, well, that's an easy fix. Move on.
I agree 100%. Adam, tell the people where they can find you and your podcast.
So you could find us on Instagram at The Unanimous Decision, MTL. We're not necessarily as active there. If you want the more active account, it's at Adam Caplan 13 on Instagram and Twitter. That's where you could find me for The Unanimous Decision. And then as well, the podcast, Overcast, Apple Music, Spotify. And, you know, you could also obviously catch me on The Savage Show, which is on Apple Podcasts. And, you know, you got to look out for all the heavy hitters out there in the young podcast game that are coming up on YouTube and Apple Music. So, you know, just like your food, support local podcasts.
That's awesome, man. Thanks again for coming on the Savage Show. I appreciate it. And, man, I enjoyed this. We should do this again.
Thanks, bro. Thanks for having me on, man. It was a blast.
All right, man. Catch you later.